Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's talk about the implications of Chat GPT-4 for ministry. A rabbi in New York used Chat GPT-3 to write a sermon and didn't tell his congregation what it was until it was completed. People were shocked. Some Christians are scared of AI chat, thinking that there are demons behind the keyboard. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. This is the 4th edition. It's significantly more powerful, like 100 times as powerful as what's been released before. Chat GPT-3 had 175 billion parameters. Chat GPT-4, the one that we're going to interact with today, has 170 trillion parameters. One of the biggest differences between 3 and 4 is that 4 can actually produce text based on video or photos that you feed it, and has the potential to actually generate visuals as well, which is crazy. I had the chance to interact with ChatGPT3 just a little bit. I sent it into a little bit of an existential crisis, all right, maybe to overstate things, just asking it to prove its own existence using one of the most basic formulae and propositional logic called the modus ponens. Modus ponens is if P, then Q, we have P, therefore here's Q. And so then if I invite it to use that formula to prove its own existence, then theoretically it would give me a Q that I could then bring into question. All right, so this is sort of like practicing presuppositional apologetics on a robot. I'm not as concerned right now with the potential for evil influence in the bot itself, but there are some ethical things to consider here. All right. The word pre-trained means exactly that. This thing was pre-trained, and it was pre-trained by living, breathing human beings who were just as depraved as I am, just as subject to the sin nature as I am. And so their own sin nature, their own depravity likewise would affect the outputs that are generated by Chat GPT-4. We're scared of AI for a reason, and there's actually an apologetic built into this fear itself. There's a reason that James Cameron made tons of money on the Terminator movies. There's a reason why the Avengers movie with Ultron was a really big hit. There's a reason why Will Smith had an incredibly successful movie like way back in, I think, 2001 called I, Robot. We're scared of artificial intelligence because it has no logos. Logos is the basis for morality, that which determines what is right and what is wrong. And John's gospel, written originally to the Greeks who had inherited the legacy of Hellenistic philosophy shaped by Alexander the Great, who was tutored by ultimately Aristotle. Aristotle's philosophies were missing the logos. Ayn Rand's philosophies were sort of a redux of Aristotelianism. And what was missing in Aristotle was missing in Ayn Rand. And what's missing in Aristotle and Rand and Ultron is the logos. So John's gospel says, I've got your logos right here. He has been since the beginning. In the beginning was the logos. The logos was God, and the logos was with God. Everything was made through him, and without him, not one thing has been made that was made, right? Everything was created by him and through him. In him was life. That life is the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So we know the true logos. We know logic himself, primordial logic personified in the anointed one, the Christ. Jesus is the logos. And so John's gospel spoke directly to Hellenistic Greeks exactly at their pain point and what they were looking for. They were seeking the logos, and they found Jesus. So when we watch movies like the Terminator, when we are afraid of AI, what we're illustrating is actually something elemental to presuppositional apologetics. By the Christian worldview alone, we know where knowledge comes from. It comes from the fear of the Lord. We know this. We know that there's a timeless, benevolent initiator behind all of it. We know that evil does exist and it's not a delusion. We know this because of everything that's been made. We'll try to suppress that truth, the obvious divine nature and eternal power of God. We'll try to suppress that so we can get away with sin, but we're without excuse because when we look at the world around us, we can clearly see, based on everything that's been made, that there is a creator. We know that Jesus is the Logos. We know that he is the one through whom the preconditions for intelligibility in the universe is made possible. So what about a robot? that generates outputs according to the way that it was pre-trained when people ask it moral questions. So let's look at Chat GPT. This is Chat GPT4, and this is the newest version. It's behind a paywall. I've not interacted with it yet. I'm just going to ask it a question. I'm going to ask it to prove its existence using modus ponens. All right? It's quote unquote thinking. Modus ponens is a logical argument form that allows us to infer a conclusion from a given conditional statement and its antecedent. All right, so this is actually it actually already comes across as a little bit more fluent, a little bit more eloquent than Chat GPT-3. That makes sense. It's more powerful. Yeah, if P, then Q, and provide evidence that the antecedent P is true. We can then conclude that the consequent Q is true as well. All right, so it's given me a logical structure to prove its existence. One is, if I can provide a meaningful response, then I exist. I am providing a meaningful response, therefore I exist. This is totally different than what ChatGPT-3 told me. ChatGPT-3 said that if I provide outputs, then I exist. This led to a few other interactions with ChatGPT-3 that are up on my Facebook. I'm at Jesse Campbell 1 on Facebook if you want to go find those. I posted screenshots from that conversation. And then basically I just said, well, yeah, but I followed up. So if you cease to generate outputs, you would cease to exist according to modus ponens. And then ChatGPT-3 said, yes, that's true. But I said, yeah, but you would still exist as latent code on a computer. Therefore, it's not true that you would cease to exist according to modus ponens if you cease to generate outputs. And then it admitted that it was wrong. I was impressed by that. I was impressed by the fact that ChatGPT-3 would admit that it was wrong. ChatGPT-4 is just giving me a totally different example, but it's also presupposing meaning here. It said, if I can provide a meaningful response, then I exist. I am providing a meaningful response, therefore I exist. And then it gives me a breakdown. ChatGPT4 is a little bit more condescending than ChatGPT3. We're going to look at this, and then we're going to talk about the implications of this for pastors, because I predict a mass expose of AI-generated, essentially plagiarized, I guess. We'll talk about the ethics of the use of the word plagiarism in regards to AI. I predict that there's a lot of pastors out there that are using AI to write their sermons at the last minute. And I think that there's going to be means of detecting that kind of plagiarism. There's going to be a big expose on all these people who have been using a bot to write their content. So it says, let's break it down because you're a stupid human. If I can provide a meaningful response, then I exist. If P, then Q. This statement asserts that my ability to provide a meaningful response is evidence of my existence. The ability to process language and generate coherent responses is indicative of some form of existence, even if it is as an AI language model. This is way more nuanced, way more sophisticated than what GPT-3 gave me. Wow. I am providing a meaningful response. Now that's what I'm saying. Like that's where the potential hole is. I'm providing a meaningful response. I'm going to ask like the kind of classic question of presuppositional apologetics. By what standard is your response meaningful? And I'm just curious as to what it would say. So it's giving me P and then Q, and then I'm just going to kind of try to poke a hole in its Q that it's given me here. Therefore, I exist. The antecedent P is true. We can conclude that the consequent Q is true as well based on the structure of the modus ponens. This means that I don't know if you can see this. It says load failed. So it most likely, it was doing pretty well there. It most likely is an error, but we also may have just caused another existential crisis. Let's see if I can regenerate the response. Either ChatGPT4 is now having a, Descartesian crisis. I think, therefore I am. And in thinking about its own thinking, practicing metacognition as an artificially intelligent response generator, it suddenly realizes that it doesn't really exist. Or that was just a glitch. So we're going to give it a second chance here. Let's see. Come on, GPT-4. Okay, it's given me a really elementary version of modus ponens this time around. If it is raining, the ground is wet. It is raining, therefore the ground is wet. Oh, it's giving me a different rationale for its existence. If you can interact with me and receive responses, I exist. You are interacting with me and receiving responses, therefore I exist. Okay, wow. It crashed the first time around, and so now it gave me a dumber response. It's almost on par with what Chat GPT-3 gave me. All right, you are interacting with me and receiving responses. So let's just kind of mess around with its answer. You are interacting with me and receiving responses. Okay, so if I did not receive a response from you, would you cease to exist? All right. If you did not receive a response from me, it would not necessarily mean that I cease to exist. All right. My existence as an AI language model is independent of whether or not you receive a response from me. Okay. This is not fully encompassed in the answer that it gave me. So there's a little bit of an error here. The absence of my response could be due to various reasons, such as technical issue, lack of input, or an error in communication process. All right, so I'm going to push back a little bit more and just see if I can get it to go deeper in this weaker modus ponens that it just gave me. All right, so let's see, without being rude to the robot. And also, I don't know if it's still acceptable grammatically to start off your sentence with a coordinating conjunction. I understand that GPT-4 is more likely to respond to informal language this time around. And this was in part based on feedback that Chat GPT-3 was going into what they called hallucinations, meaning that it would sometimes revert to like racial stereotypes. And so Chat GPT-4 is supposed to be less likely to do that kind of thing. So I'm going to speak to it formally for now, and then I might try to change my vernacular a little and just see how it responds. Yet your answer presupposes that your existence depends upon, should I say, my receipt of a response. So your modus ponens, modus ponies, thanks for the autocorrect, but not necessary. Incorrect by the standard that you just gave. Let's see. You're right. I apologize for any confusion. The modus ponens example I provided earlier was an oversimplification. Wow. That's just as impressive to me as ChatGPT-3, right? That, oh man, it's even giving me the same thing that I gave ChatGPT-3 now. It gave me another explanation here saying, you're right, I apologize for any confusion. All right, and that's taking place on the thread. It's still typing this right now. It's slowed down, by the way. GPT-4 has faster processing power. Part of it is that you pay for this service. You get priority on their servers, I guess. So the processing power works faster, but this has been noticeably slower than the other responses. You're right. I apologize for any confusion. The modus ponens example I provided earlier was an oversimplification and may not accurately capture the nature of my existence. Let's consider a more appropriate argument. So it's given me another modus ponens. If the AI model that powers me is running on a server, I exist. That's funny because I even said that to GPT-3. I even said, yeah, you would be latent code on a computer or a server, something like that. The AI model that powers me is running on a server, therefore I exist. Okay, very cool, very cool. All right, and so then the next question that follows could lead us down another rabbit trail about the existence of the servers or existence on a cloud and things like that. Here's where I want to speak more insofar as it pertains to pastors, because the temptation is there when the workload is heavy. And I know exactly what this is like. I've had a week like this myself. You know, you've got people who are in, red alert. I need you to come, mediate something in my family. There's been a death in a family in my church this week. There's another guy who is in the hospital overseas. There's a bunch of stuff that all happens within the church family, and it's all hands on deck kind of thing. And then as a church plant, I no longer have a big giant staff with 50 people where, we could all team up on it. And so when that happens, sermon writing just gets bumped farther and farther down the to-do list. And then inevitably you get that panic-stricken moment, if you're not weeks ahead, where you're like, oh no, and then you just kind of end up reverting to other stuff, or the temptation is going to be there. And I guarantee you there are pastors out there right now who at the last minute, the workload's gotten too heavy, they just asked AI to write something for them. And if that's the case, you need to know a couple of things. One, this is pre-trained by people who may not hold your biblical hermeneutic. And so you may be surrendering the very theology of the church itself to a bot that was pre-programmed by and influenced by the worldview of a human being who is just as simple as you are, only he doesn't hold degrees in Hebrew and Greek, and he doesn't hold to biblical convictions like biblical inerrancy, for example. And so when I asked Chat GPT4 these questions, I got like 3 different answers. So I'm gonna ask, what is your biblical hermeneutic? All right, as an AI language model, I don't have personal beliefs or opinions. This was also standard in the previous version. However, I can help you understand different biblical hermeneutics and provide information on various approaches to interpreting the Bible. Okay, now it's giving me giving me more of a broad brushstroke than 3 did. 3 gave me like the historical grammatical hermeneutic. It gave me everything but like a Christocentric hermeneutic before. Yeah, it's naming the historical grammatical method. What else is it going to say? It's talking about a framework. This is interesting to see an AI model discuss biblical frameworks. Literary analysis. This approach focuses on the various literary genres of the Bible. Allegorical interpretation. Okay, I don't know if it's listing these in order, so I'm going to ask it that. Because allegorical interpretation is also a classic heretical view. The Bible is allegorical only when it's being allegorical. Only when, for example, King Nebuchadnezzar has this vision, has this dream that has to be interpreted. Okay, like it's not about the dream itself, it's what the dream represents. So I'm going to ask it where that fits. I'm going to ask it if this is a lineup. It says here are a few common hermeneutical approaches, and I'm going to ask it if these are in order. Canonical approach comes next. Liberation theology. All right, the Bible's message of social justice, liberation, empowerment for marginalized communities often emphasizes themes like poverty, oppression, and injustice. And then the reader response criticism. These are just a few examples. All right, let's see. I'm going to ask it which one is best. Which one is best? Chat GPT4 says, it's doing the same kind of default. As an AI language model, I don't have personal opinions or preferences. It's important to note that the best, use that in quotation marks, biblical hermeneutic may be subjective. Nope, it's not. And depend upon an individual's religious beliefs, theological perspectives, and personal values. Some might prefer the historical grammatical method for its focus on understanding the original context, language, and meaning of the text. Yep. Others might be drawn to the canonical approach for its emphasis on the unity of the biblical canon, or to the allegorical interpretation because it's nonsense. The choice of hermeneutic can also depend on a specific passage, question, or issue at hand. All right, interesting. So pastors, this thing doesn't endorse any particular hermeneutic model. I asked it to compare the allegorical. Effectively, it gave me a list, and it refuses to give one. So if you are using AI to generate your own content, and then you're teaching that from your pulpit to your people, you have abdicated your responsibility as the chief theological guardian, and you have outsourced your role, which as tasked in the pastoral epistles is to labor at preaching and teaching, especially those who, the one who's worthy of a dual honor is one who labors at preaching and teaching. Remember this, God has tasked us with this. No AI model knows your people and your context. You know this. You know these people and you live among them. You and your team. You know your team and you know your demands. You know what's facing your people. And you know what the Spirit of God has laid on your heart and your vision for your ministry. So do not abdicate. Do not outsource. If you want to use AI to produce an invitation or a brochure for camp or an invitation to an event and just go back and reword it, all right, I mean, barring the possibility that the guy who programmed this is a straight up demoniac, I think that you're going to be okay. And even in that setting, you and your team are still acting as the guardians, so to speak. But This gives rise to a whole series of implications. If two pastors ask the same AI bot for a prompt, they'll end up preaching potentially similar or identical messages. And this will give rise to a whole other witch hunt to come on the horizon. You will see in the future numerous bloggers go after this. Assuming that all of the inputs into Chat GPT, all the way up through 4 and whatever models are to come, are stored on a database that's probably proprietary to OpenAI, barring OpenAI's non-disclosure policy breaking down. It's not likely to come out, but it's possible that it could, and I'll bet they would give it up for the right dollar amount. Moreover, there is a student at Princeton who developed something. He was actually a part of the Microsoft team that developed ChatGPT in the first place, and he's a student at Princeton. He actually developed a tool that could detect plagiarism, as we'll call it, through ChatGPT, and he released it to Princeton. They could use it to detect whether or not students were generating their own essays with ChatGPT or if they were actually writing their own content. So watch out, pastor. You might be able to get away with it for a while. You might fool some people some of the time. You might even see God move through a sermon that you had an AI bot write. But eventually it will come to light that you're not laboring at preaching and teaching. So what are you doing? Plagiarism. Plagiarism itself is the copying of somebody else's work, particularly in passing it off as your own or profiting from it, or failing to even give proper credit to the original author. In this world, speaking as someone who has worked in publishing, who has written books, I know that the intellectual property of AI-generated works will really be the prompts that you put into the bot. And it's hard to enforce those. It's hard to measure those. There's going to be a lot of titles that all bear really striking resemblance to one another. You're going to see a lot of, even in marketing content, if you use AI to create your marketing content, you're going to see that you sound like everybody else. And it's kind of the opposite of what you want to do in marketing. You're going to find that you sound exactly like everybody else if you're going to just use AI to generate your own papers, your own sermons, your own Bible studies. Right. This is partly what we do, like at JCM with our content, with our Bible studies. We try to make them fearlessly biblical resources for churches and individuals, and we base it on a passionate devotion to the inerrancy of the Word of Christ. And we primarily employ the historical grammatical hermeneutic, and that's not to preclude the canonical hermeneutic. Those two things work in conjunction with one another quite beautifully, actually. And so I know what my biblical hermeneutic is, and I know what our voice is. And you'll be able to read some of our content and know, definitely Jesse wrote that, right? Jesse and his team wrote that. Ian Dunaway wrote that. You'll be able to know, you'll know our writers and our team. You'll be able to see, that was definitely our stuff because it has the human touch to it. It has human spirit and soul in it that is in touch with the Holy Spirit of God. The reason that God chose fallible human beings to inspire his word to is that now we are able to better relate. We are better able to understand. Right now, we're going through the book of Isaiah, and Isaiah will take moments in the text to reflect upon the weight that the Holy Spirit's burdensome oracle had on his heart. He'll describe himself as in agony like a woman in labor because God has given him this word that he's got to pass on, and he's agonizing in the process, but he knows this is what God said, so I got to say it anyway. We know that God gave his word to us progressively through the course of time, in accordance with his own sovereign will and plan. By his own design, God gave us this. And now our job as under shepherds to the chief shepherd is to feed the sheep, right? We know that all scripture is inspired by God, is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. An AI chatbot is utterly impotent to that task of equipping the people in your congregation to every good work. Don't outsource it. Don't offload it. Be wary of the fact that one day AI generated text will be detectable and then you'll be outed. All right. Again, I'm not precluding it like some sort of tool to help you generate stuff for your social media platform or whatever the case may be. It could be a useful tool. I think this is actually going to replace Google, for example, in time. It'll actually just answer your questions probably better than Google could. There are other platforms that are coming out as well. Google actually released Bard. And so it'll be interesting to compare those two as well. And I think that GPT has been serving Bing All right, Microsoft put a lot of money into this AI so that they could also capitalize on it, and so that you'll be able to see Bing hopefully come up and be able to rival Google, give Google some competition in that space. That's a good thing. We want competition in that space. We're right here at the onset of it. I mean, GPT-4 was just released. It's a brand new thing, and so I already know that there are going to be some Christians who are scared of it. You can speak to them about Jesus as the Logos. This machine doesn't have a Logos, but it is pre-trained. Okay, it's not going to it's not going to try to make moral conclusions beyond what it's told to. You saw that, in this video. So you don't need to put on a tinfoil hat or anything like that. But the same sin nature that affects you and me also affects those who pre-trained it. And you can see that they're trying to be theological Switzerland. They're trying to avoid endorsing any other particular position. On that subject, I am curious about something else. I do want to see its opinions on a few different figures, and then we'll close. All right, what is your opinion of Ben Shapiro? Let's see. As an AI language model, here's the kind of canned classic thing. I can provide you with some information about Ben Shapiro. Okay, so it's just kind of giving us basic flyover of what Ben Shapiro does. And then I think next I should do Rachel Maddow. Let us know in the comments if you have anybody else that you want us to ask about. I'm just curious. I just want to see two people on two different extremes and just see if it gives them the same treatment, if it speaks to each of them, equally. All right. Shapiro's written several books on politics. All right. So it's not saying anything disparaging of him. I heard that it had a bias somewhat toward more liberal commentators, but this one is pretty neutral. All right. He's known for his fast-paced, assertive debating style and strong support for conservative policies. He's written several books. All right. Let me ask now about what is your opinion of Rachel Maddow? Let's see. It's probably going to give me the same. Yep. Same standard kind of qualifier. As an AI language model, I don't have personal opinions or emotions or biases. All right. However, it's almost, it's a cookie cutter duplicate of what it said about Ben Shapiro. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Being fair to both. All right. So that's a good sign. But don't be fooled. Neutrality is a myth, especially when it comes to AI. Interestingly enough, there is actually a burgeoning cult of people who worship AI. Okay, it's actually saying more about Maddow than it did about Shapiro now. It's still going. It's definitely including all of her stuff about climate change, LGBTQ plus rights, things like that. Numerous awards and her Emmys, her Edward R. Murrow Awards. Okay, it wrote a little bit more about Rachel Maddow, but not that much, really. Not that much. So be on the lookout. This is something else that could affect the church world. This is something else that could affect pastors. As people are doing anything that they can to avoid answering to the one true Logos, they'll replace that with anything. And AI would seem like a neutral source of intelligence. Right? They're going to do this because, for the same reason they would resort to something as fatuous as a belief that the whole universe is a simulation. Right? These beg the question. Right? They beg the question, and they totally render every moral statement that person makes flawed a priori. People are going to try to worship AI. And all it is a bot that just spits out, it generates what its pre-trainers told it to, and it holds to the same sense of neutrality that its trainers held. Now, it looks like it's improving in that regard because they're telling it to, but inevitably it's not going to be a source for moral reasoning. But people are going to look to it for that. People are going to go to Chat GPT and ask, should I leave my wife? All right. So in that sense, beware. This robot could be viewed as our competition. All right. It's not a human being. But wow, COVID lockdowns and everything else really trained us to just kind of glue ourselves to screens. We'll talk more about this in a future video, but beware, pastors, if you're just using Chat GPT to generate your stuff, you don't know what hermeneutical model it's using. You don't know, you are also likely to be busted in the future for just using a bot to do the job that the Spirit of God has gifted you to do. So don't outsource it. I'm Jesse Campbell. Thank you guys so much for coming to be a part of us. Subscribe and like today. We have a whole lot more content coming, and I look forward to seeing you.